It's late at night, and you realize something's been slipping into your room for, let's call it, after-hours activities. You wake up drained, delirious, and sometimes not at all. And as bad as that sounds, it's still better than the demon who murders every husband you ever marry just to keep you to himself. Or maybe that's worse. Either way, this is the disturbing demonology iceberg. Tier 1. Aamon. Aamon is known as the demon of life and reproduction, which sounds weirdly wholesome until you actually see what he looks like. According to multiple grimoires, including the Lesser Key of Solomon, Aamon takes the form of a flaming wolf-serpent hybrid with the head of an owl and the teeth of a dog. And yes, he's the guy in charge of fertility. So if your mental image of baby-making didn't already include a fire-breathing chimera, congratulations, now it does. The Pseudomonarchia Daemonum from 1583 gives us the most detailed physical description of Aamon. It keeps the whole wolf with a serpent's tail that spits fire thing, but it adds that he can also take human form when needed, though that version is just as disturbing, with an owl-like head and teeth that belong on something rabid. The book also calls him the strongest prince of all other. Aamon is listed as a Grand Marquis of Hell, which basically means he's high-ranking demon royalty. He governs 40 legions of demons, which is bougie underworld speak for a lot. His resume includes knowing everything that has ever happened and things that are to come, solving fights between friends, and for some reason no one can explain, summoning the spirits of people who drowned. Why those three things go together is anyone's guess. Some sources link Aamon to Amun, the Egyptian god of creation and hidden power, who is often fused with Ra as Amun-Ra, and sometimes painted blue to show his divine, untouchable nature. The connection mostly comes from their names sounding similar, but historians don't really buy it. Still, it hasn't stopped demonology texts from making the stretch. You know what they say? When in doubt, just say your demon might be loosely inspired by a major ancient deity. That'll add credibility. But here's the part that actually matters. Aamon isn't just another scary-looking demon. He governs over memory, relationships, and reproduction. The literal building blocks of society are, in this cosmology, being managed by this guy. And Aamon's not even an outlier. There are entire grimoires packed with demons just like him. In Tier 4, there's a demon that mated with humans and produced children. But before that, let's talk about a demon that didn't quite start out as one. Abaddon. Originally, in the Hebrew Bible, Abaddon wasn't a person or demon. It was a place, usually mentioned alongside Sheol, aka the grave, or underworld, depending on how dramatic your translator is. In instances where Abaddon is mentioned alongside Sheol, it's described as wide open, bottomless, and hungry, which kinda tracks since Abaddon means destruction in Hebrew. In Greek, it becomes Apollyon, which just means destroyer. Job, Psalms, and Proverbs all refer to it as a place that swallows everything, including wisdom, love, and fire. It's where things go when they stop being things. You can think of it as the landfill of the afterlife, except it's always expanding. In the book of Revelation, things get interesting. There's an angel mentioned that fits Abaddon's description. This angel commands an army of horse-shaped locusts with human faces, lion's teeth, women's hair, and scorpion tails. His job is to torment people who don't have God's seal on their forehead for 5 whole months. Not kill, by the way, just torment. This angel is also called the Angel of the Abyss, and according to Revelation chapter 9, verse 11, that's Abaddon in Hebrew and Apollyon in Greek. What do you think the word is in Latin? I'll give you one guess. Time's up. It's exterminans. And yes, it means exactly what it sounds like. As specific as Abaddon's job description sounds, people still can't seem to agree on who he actually is. Some say he's Satan, while others think he's the Antichrist. Then there are those who believe he's just doing God's dirty work. But the wildest theory of all comes from certain Christian groups who claim he's actually the resurrected Christ. It sounds like a reach, but Revelation is vague enough that you can kind of see how they got there. In other texts, rabbinical, apocryphal, and Mandean, Abaddon is everything from a feared underworld realm to a judge of the dead. In one Gnostic homily, he even helps create Adam, then later shows up at the resurrection, like an unwanted guest who never left the party. Asmodeus. The first thing you should know about this guy is that he really hates weddings. Asmodeus, also known as Ashmedai, is a demon with roots that go way back. He's usually depicted with 3 heads, 1 rooster leg, a snake tail, and he rides a dragon. His name is believed to come from the Zoroastrian demon of wrath, Aeshma. Though the paperwork is messy, you'll hear about him in Tier 4. Over time, Asmodeus moved through Jewish, Christian, and Islamic lore, collecting titles like King of the Demons, Destroyer of Lust, and that one cursed guy in the book of Tobit who killed all the grooms. In Tobit, Asmodeus is basically Sarah's personal haunting. She's the daughter of a man named Regel and a relative of Tobit, a blind Israelite living in exile. Sarah keeps trying to get married, but every time she does, Asmodeus, who's obsessed with her, kills the husband before they can even share a bed. It happens 7 times, and by the end, people are convinced she's cursed. But then comes Tobias, Tobit's son, who happens to have God and an angel in his corner. With some help and a smoked fish liver, he manages to drive Asmodeus away. The demon gets exorcised and chained up in Egypt, and Sarah finally gets a husband who lives through the wedding night. In the Talmud, though, Asmodeus has a weird personality switch. He's still dangerous, but also kind of quirky. He drinks, jokes, and even gets tricked into building Solomon's temple. At one point, he body swaps with King Solomon and rules in his stead. Nobody notices for years, which says a lot about the job. Islamic stories borrowed that plot too. In those, he's called Sakhr, or the Rock, because after Solomon defeats him, he locks him in a stone and throws him into the sea. In one tale, travelers find him locked in a stone in the middle of the desert. The passage then goes to say he was still alive and looked very, very angry when he was found. And because no pantheon is complete without blaming a demon for desire, in Christian demonology, Asmodeus is the demon of lust. Catholic scholars says he runs all the gambling houses in hell and commands 72 legions of lesser demons. In demon ranking circles, he's a hotshot king and is second only to Lucifer. Despite his resume, Asmodeus isn't just evil. In some versions, he falls in love, and in others, he's married to Lilith. In Kabbalistic lore, he's even part human. What stays the same, though, is that wherever he shows up, something goes horribly wrong. Belial. Let's say you're reading the Old Testament and you see the words sons of Belial. That's not a compliment. It's Hebrew for worthless people. Not quirky or misguided, just completely useless. In early texts, Belial wasn't even a person. It was shorthand for moral garbage, idolaters, abusers, and people who stirred up civil war. Basically, if a scene opened with sons of Belial, someone's getting stabbed. Eventually, Belial got a promotion. Somewhere between the Dead Sea Scrolls and early Christianity, this idea of worthlessness put on a crown, sprouted wings, and became the chief of all darkness. The Dead Sea sects made him a demon king, where he commands armies of destruction. He's the one God uses when he wants to let evil off the leash, whatever that means. Eventually, Belial becomes a full character in the war, light versus darkness, God versus Belial. You get the point. It's also very dramatic. Belial is not just a demon though. In the Qumran text, he's actually an angel. Specifically, an angel created by God to lead forces of wickedness. The scrolls make it very clear that when the final war comes, Belial's forces, which by the way are numerous and meant to test humanity. Well, that's comforting. Over in the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, he becomes an opposing god, an actual enemy force competing with God for control of human souls. Later on in Christian literature, he's depicted as Satan Light, a slick talker and a manipulator. So pretty much a lawyer from hell who sounds smart, but smells like rot. Milton's Paradise Lost calls him charming, cowardly, and vile. Unlike other demons, Belial doesn't kick down the door, just talks you into leaving it unlocked. By the time you get to modern occult texts, Belial's gotten cozy. In the Satanic Bible, he's one of hell's 4 princes. His domain is the earth, not the sky or even fire. The normal physical world, real life, because that's where worthlessness spreads best. Beelzebub. Beelzebub, the fly guy, started off as a Beelzebub, a deity worshipped as the god of the sky in the Philistine city of Ekron. One of the earliest mentions of his name appears in the Hebrew Bible, when King Ahaziah of Israel, after being injured, sends messengers to ask Beelzebub if he'll recover. Yeah, that was a pretty big mistake. According to the text, God wasn't thrilled by this. Ahaziah had disrespected him by going to Beelzebub for answers instead of him. So he sent Elijah to meet the messengers with a message of his own. Elijah declared that as punishment for what he'd done, Ahaziah was going to die. And he did. So the earliest mention of Baal is him getting someone killed just for being associated with him. The term Baal originally just meant Lord. What follows, Zavuv, meaning flies, is debated. Some say it was a direct reference to a real cult, and others think it was a mocking nickname. It's possible the original name was Beelzebul, meaning Lord of the High Place or Heavenly Dwelling, which would make more sense for a deity associated with the sky. but Zevub stuck, and over time, the name took on a more sinister meaning. Later on, in texts like the Testament of Solomon, Beelzebub claims to have been a high-ranking angel who now causes destruction, stirs up conflict, and leads people toward worship of lesser spirits. He's associated with the evening star, Venus, and sometimes mixed up with Lucifer. By the medieval period, Beelzebub was firmly placed in the demonological hierarchies, often described as a prince of hell, second only to Satan. He's listed among the 7 deadly demons and linked to gluttony and envy, depending on the source. Writers like Johann Weyer and Sebastian Michaelis describe him as a powerful fallen angel. In Paradise Lost, he sits beside Satan as his closest advisor. Big promotion. During the European witch trials, his name comes up frequently in confessions and exorcisms. Needless to say, he's a very busy demon. During the witch trials, Beelzebub became one of the church's favorite scapegoats for just about everything, from temptation and possession to the supposed moral rot spreading through villages. Witch-hunting manuals like the Malleus Maleficarum claimed he lured people into pacts, attended witches' sabbaths, and spread sin like a disease. All the allegations helped cement his role as the demon of corruption. The shift from regional god to demon wasn't entirely an accident. It just so happened that as religions developed and drew clear lines, older deities were reclassified. And that's how Beelzebub went from Skylord to Lord of the Flies. There's a demon Beelzebub is particularly fond of. You'll meet him in Tier 2. In the meantime, you're about to meet Satan's wardrobe manager, Adrammelech. Adrammelech is generally depicted with a human torso, a mule's head, a peacock's tail, and limbs that look like a mix of both. In the Bible, he's listed as one of the gods worshipped by the Sepharvites, a tribe of people who were conquered by the Assyrians and relocated to Samaria. According to 2 Kings chapter 17 verse 31, they burned their children alive as offerings to him. But he was just one god among many. So he shared the stage with another god named Adrammelech. They may have been a pair because both of them required child sacrifice as a method of worship. The name Adrammelech likely means majestic king. Scholars once tried to link him to Baal or even Hadad, but most of that's been debunked. What remains is that he was associated with fire, power, and killing your own children to stay on his good side. Later tradition turned him into a demon, which is what usually happens when a god goes out of fashion. According to the Talmud, his idol looked like a donkey or a peacock, depending on which rabbis you ask. In Paradise Lost, John Milton gives him a supporting role as a fallen angel, and by the 19th century, demonologists got more creative. Cullen de Plancy's Infernal Dictionary appoints him as Hell's Senate President and Satan's personal wardrobe manager. Yep. The level of bureaucratic nonsense Hell apparently runs on now includes wardrobe management. Tier 2. Lucifer. Satan. Lucifer is the angel who staged the first rebellion. When he did it, he wasn't some horned monster lurking in the shadows. He was flawless, high-ranking, and powerful. But he wanted God's throne for himself. His pride got him cast out of heaven, and in Christian demonology, that fall is the origin of the devil. The name Lucifer only appears once in the Bible. In Isaiah chapter 14 verse 12, where it calls someone the morning star, son of the dawn. Originally was a poetic jab at the king of Babylon, not a demon. But early Christian thinkers like Origen and Augustine turned it into the backstory of heaven's greatest traitor. Over time, the Latin word for the planet Venus became the name everyone associates with spiritual treason. What makes Lucifer disturbing isn't fire and brimstone. It's that he was perfect, beautiful, respected. Some traditions say he led worship in heaven and stood just below God in authority. Yet he convinced a third of the angels to follow him straight into darkness. That's the blueprint for every act of pride and rebellion in Christian theology. It starts with thinking you deserve more than God. Unlike the lower tier demons blamed for possessions and poltergeists, Lucifer plays a slower and smarter game. He works through whispers and ideas, and he tempts with ambition, pride, and the same lie that ruined him. You could be your own God. If Christian theology is right, he isn't rotting in hell. He's out here, moving quietly, watching the proud and smiling when he sees someone start to look a little too much like him. Legion. In the Gospel of Mark, Jesus meets a man who's possessed. But he wasn't just screaming in the street, muttering to animals possessed. This guy was living in a graveyard, mutilating himself with rocks, and he was strong enough to snap chains like they were made of string. Jesus does what any exorcist would do in the situation, asks the demon's name, and it answered, "My name is Legion, for we are many. That sentence has now stuck around for over 2,000 years and made appearances in just about every demon-based horror movie ever made. In demonology, Legion is one of the earliest clear examples of a multi-entity possession. By that, I mean a hive of spirits speaking with one voice. The New Testament doesn't explicitly say how many demons were in him, but later interpretations, especially medieval grimoires, latch onto the Roman military context. A Roman legion had 3,000 to 6,000 soldiers, and so that's the number of people settled on. The poor man was dealing with thousands of demons, packed into his body, sharing one mind and one will. Unlike other named demons in later Christian lore like Beelzebub, Asmodeus, and Belial, Legion isn't a personality. You can think of it like an organized infestation, or worse still, an invasion. When Jesus commands the demons to leave, they beg him not to throw them into the abyss. He responds by tossing them into a herd of about 2,000 pigs. Moments later, they immediately stampede into the sea and drown, every last one of them. The townsfolk come out, see the man calm and clothed, and instead of celebrating, they ask Jesus to leave. Why? Probably because he just destroyed their livestock economy in under 5 minutes. The pigs were vessels, and the demons killed themselves, or killed the pigs to escape, or were doing what they always do, destroying whatever they touch. I guess we'll never know. What we do know is that demonology seems to have a thing for pigs. In Tier 6, there's an entry where people turn into pigs and commit all kinds of crime. Astaroth. The first thing you need to know here is that Astaroth isn't the goddess Astarte from Phoenician and Canaanite mythology. She's the Canaanite and Phoenician goddess of love, war, and fertility, often linked to Ishtar and Aphrodite. The demon Astaroth just stole her name, which is not unheard of in demonology. All it takes is thousands of years of cultural drift, some mistranslations, and here we are. The version of Astaroth we know today comes mostly from grimoires in the 1400s and 1500s. These were handwritten guides on how to summon demons if you needed help ruining your life. Astaroth shows up often, usually described as a great duke of hell, who rides a dragon, holds a snake, and gives surprisingly good advice. He's said to rule over 40 legions of spirits, which is impressive until you realize nobody actually knows what that means. Still, most people can't even manage a group chat. He also answers any question you ask, and sounds like an overall great guy, but then you remember that he is a demon. Astaroth supposedly tempts people with laziness, self-doubt, and bad philosophy. Nothing extreme like murder or plagues. He just likes making people think too much and do too little. So if you've ever been stuck overthinking your life while putting off important schoolwork, congratulations, that's Astaroth. Medieval writers have claimed that he attacks the hardest in August, and that he could teach math, make you invisible, or hand you a treasure map. That's quite the range. Later, demonologists claimed he was a prince of accusers, inquisitors, which basically means he's the one hell consults when it wants to lawyer up. One fun historical footnote is that he was listed as a co-signer on a demonic pact used in a 1634 trial and execution of French priest Urban Grandier. So people have died because of his name, but there are still no confirmed sightings. Leraie. Leraie is a proper quintessential demon that shows up in all the usual demonology guest lists like the Lesser Key of Solomon, Pseudemonarchia Daemonum, and Dictionnaire Infernal. In all of them, he's called the Marquis of Hell, and his job includes starting fights, spreading decay, and ruining bodies. He's described as handsome, which oddly is a fact that comes up a lot, and he's said to be gallant even. He wears green, carries a bow, and always looks like he's about to win a medieval archery tournament. But when any of his arrows pierce the body, it rots the wound quickly. 30 legions of demons work under him, or 33, depending on who's telling the story. Either way, that's a lot of backup for one guy in green tights. Some texts also say he can summon or dismiss lovers and can end relationships on command. He can also start them, which would be a deeply devastating power in today's world considering the dating pool. Weyer, one of the old scholars who cataloged this sort of thing, added that Leraie can also disperse mobs. If you're wondering how that works, well, everyone just suddenly decided they've got something better to do. Leraie's not one of the famous demons, so there are no cults or historic possessions attributed to him. But if ever you wanted to ruin a kingdom quietly, he's your guy. Abyzou. Abyzou shows up across centuries and continents with many names and no known shape, except for a few constants. She's always female, she's always angry, and she wants children she can never have. In the Testament of Solomon, Solomon is interrogating demons like he usually does when Abyzou appears with wild snake hair and a face that gleams sickly green. He describes her body as just darkness. She tells him she never sleeps and only wanders endlessly, looking for women in labor. If she gets close enough, she strangles the child. That's her whole purpose. Although the other problems she spreads for fun include madness, deafness, eye trouble, body pain, and sore throats. But it's the infants she really wants. The reason is simple. She's barren, and envy makes her vicious. So Solomon chains her by the hair and hangs her outside the temple as a warning, which was good news for all the women who were pregnant at the time. Still, they couldn't get too comfortable, because Abyzou wasn't the only demon gunning for them. There was also Pontianak, though her reasons were a little different. You'll find out why in Tier 6. But first, let's talk about the demon even Beelzebub himself had something to say about. Abezethibou. In the Testament of Solomon, there's a demon named Abezethibou. And while he's not one of the famous ones, he was still important enough to be mentioned by Beelzebub himself. According to the story, he followed Beelzebub when the angels fell and tore off one of his wings in the process. He landed in hell, missing a piece of himself, and the wing that was left had turned red. After that, he made himself useful by becoming a strategist and advisor to Beelzebub. He took on the role of keeping things in order in Tartarus, which is hell's basement for the truly condemned. He was the one in charge of keeping the worst beings locked up. He shows up later in Egypt too, and in this version, which you'll find in the Testament of Solomon, it wasn't God who hardened Pharaoh's heart. It was Abezethibou. It was he who convinced Pharaoh and his advisors to chase the Israelites. And when the Red Sea collapsed, the Egyptian army drowned, and Abezethibou drowned with them. But he didn't die. Instead, he got stuck, sealed inside a pillar of water. And according to Beelzebub, he's still there. In the Testament of Solomon, Abezethibou claims he used to sit in the first heaven before the war. This was way before he became a prison guard and got buried under the sea. He says he held the Egyptian sorcerers Janus and Jambres and gave them power to fight Moses with signs and wonders. Beelzebub says Abezethibou will come back from imprisonment one day, when he's ready. Baphomet. In the Christian demonology pipeline, Baphomet didn't start out as a demon. He first appeared as a legal accusation. In 1307, King Philip IV of France had many members of the Knights Templar arrested and tortured. He owed them a lot of money, and he wanted their wealth and influence gone. So he gathered hundreds of them, accused them of a bunch of different crimes, and then tortured them into confessing. Problem solved. Under torture, some confessed to worshipping a mysterious head called Baphomet. Others said it had 3 faces, or was a skull, or a cat, or possibly Jesus. There's a very high chance that none of it existed because there's no record of any Baphomet in official Templar rules. But the Inquisition didn't know that, so they ran with it. By the 19th century, Baphomet had been recycled by occultist Eliphas Levi. He gave it a makeover and turned it into a winged goat with assets, a torch on its head, one hand pointing up and one down. Levi said this symbol showed the balance of opposites, male and female, human and animal, light and dark. You get the idea. That image, not the Templar stuff, is what stuck. It got adopted into occult circles, some Freemason speculation, and eventually pop Satanism. So what or who is Baphomet really? That depends a lot on who's asking. In occultism, it's a symbol. In fundamentalist Christian demonology, it's a literal demon, aka proof of satanic infiltration. In Templar history, it's either a smear campaign or a ritual gone wrong. In all cases, it's disturbing for the same reason. People keep using it as a catch-all for whatever scares them, including heresy, adult stuff, witchcraft, or simply not following the program. Baphomet was never actually worshipped in an organized structure, so it has no consistent doctrine, and yet it shows up over and over again as the face of ultimate rebellion, put together from paranoia, projection, and goat parts. Oh, and some people like to associate it with the Illuminati, but that's a whole other story. If you think Baphomet's origin story is weird, wait till Tier 5. Where you'll hear about the demon that was born from the sweat of the Hindu goddess Parvati. Tier 3. Iblis or Eblis. In Islam, Iblis's villain origin story starts with a simple argument. The first crack wasn't a war, it was an argument. God created Adam, and then told the angels to bow to his new creation. They all bowed, except Iblis, who, by the way, is the biblical equivalent of Satan. He said no, but not because he didn't believe in God. Quite the opposite. Iblis thought he was staying true to him. Some Sufis even call this loyalty, but most say it was just pride talking. This moment is detailed in multiple places in the Quran, including Surah al-Baqarah, Surah al-Araf, and Surah Sad. Iblis argued that his refusal wasn't defiance, but a kind of fidelity to God's uniqueness. He claimed that bowing to Adam violated God's exclusive right to be worshipped. Now, here's where it gets tricky. He wasn't human, and he wasn't quite an angel either. Depending on which scholar you ask, he was either the highest of the Jinn, pretending to be an angel, or an angel who messed up so badly he had to be reclassified. What's agreed is this: he was formed from fire, and he thought fire was better than clay. This reasoning that fire is nobler than clay is recorded in Surah Al-Araf, where Iblis says, "You created me from fire and created him from clay." His arrogance is what ultimately damned him. Since he refused to bow to what he saw as a lesser being, he was kicked out of God's presence. According to the Quran in Surah Al-Hijr and Surah Sad, Iblis asked God to give him time until the day of judgment so he could mislead humans, and God allowed it as a test for mankind. From that moment, his mission became tempting people away from the straight path. In line with the agreement he made with God, Iblis whispers and he invites, but he does not force. That's the rule. If you fall because you wanted to. Some Sufi thinkers complicate this further by calling him the true monotheist, because he bows not to a human or even to heaven itself, but only to God. They say he failed on purpose, as a kind of dark devotion. Others say that's nonsense, and that's exactly the kind of trick Iblis would pull, to make rebellion look like loyalty, and make you feel smart while you sin. Jinn. The Jinn are not quite demons, but they're not quite ghosts either. They are supernatural beings from the Arabian world, and while they were absorbed into Islam, they are older than it. Pre-Islamic Arab tribes worshipped them until Islam came along and demoted them from god status. Jinn have free will, which is not very characteristic of demons. They can also be good or bad, and usually, most are just minding their business. But when they're bad, they're not cartoon villains. They like to go all out. They live in desolate places and have the ability to shapeshift. Their common forms include appearing as snakes, scorpions, lizards, and deformed humanoids. Sometimes they help people and can even fall in love with them, but some might kill you and take over your body. You usually don't get to pick. The Muslim world widely believes in possession by Jinn, so people wear talismans with God's name to avoid attacks. Some go to exorcists when symptoms like seizures, voices, sudden strength, and depression start to plague them. Jinn possession is considered a legitimate illness by many. And while some Islamic scholars disagree, they're not the ones getting scratched by invisible things at night. Jinn aren't just folklore. They have legal status in Islamic jurisprudence. For example, they can own property. They're expected to follow Islamic law. And surprisingly, there are debates. If you think the bizarre stuff stops there, think again. There are hadiths about Jinn-human mating. Most scholars say don't do it, but people try anyway. And not shockingly, those stories usually end badly. At best, the kid turns out gifted, and at worst, you die. That said, it's in your best interest to maybe stick with your kind when it's time to play. If you step on a Jinn in the forest or walk into a bathroom without saying Bismillah, which is exactly what you're supposed to say to keep them away, folklore says you've basically handed them a written invitation to ruin your night. Ifrit. The word Ifrit appears in the Quran only once, when a demon offers to carry a queen's throne to Solomon. He's strong, fast, and very eager to impress. However, he gets passed over when God gives the job to someone else. After that, they show up here and there in old books, usually trying to disrupt prophets, possess people, or demand attention. In folklore, it's even worse. The Ifrit goes from being just demon to being the big, bitter, fiery bullies who live underground. They live in the parts of the world humans are smart enough to avoid, like deserts, ruins, and graveyards, and are usually tied to murder, revenge, and sometimes the dead themselves, especially if the dead didn't die peacefully. Islamic texts say God sometimes sends them to test people, which is what the scholars say happened in the case of Job, the prophet. He gets tormented by 3 Ifrits as part of his suffering, but it later turns out it's not his punishment, just some kind of training. When people try to answer the question of where exactly Ifrits come from, things get tricky. In some Egyptian folklore, it's believed that a murdered person's soul can turn into an Ifrit. The theory is that if it hangs around the crime scene long enough, it'll get mad enough to become a fiery, vicious demon. The only way to stop this from happening is to drive a nail into the spilled blood, which raises the question, are we pinning the soul to the floor, or just giving it something to think about? Ifrits also show up in stories like 1001 Nights, where they kidnap women, shapeshift into monsters, and get tricked into jars, which is the Western version people remember. Tier 4. Succubus. In folklore, a succubus is a demon that feeds on men by sleeping with them. She drains energy, steals their fluids, and sometimes comes back night after night until the man is sick, broken, or dead. It was taken seriously enough that medieval rabbis and priests held exorcisms to stop it. The word succubus has Latin origins. It means to lie beneath, which tells you both what she does and how the church felt about it. Early stories from Jewish mysticism name Lilith, the first wife of Adam, as the original succubus. Apparently, because she refused to submit, she got with the archangel Samael instead, and ended up spawning legions of demons. We'll get to the details later in Tier 6. Succubi supposedly use the fluids they take to make monsters. They pass it to male demons called incubi, who then impregnate women. The offspring, called cambions, were used to explain birth defects or kids with weird powers. In other words, if your baby showed up looking strange or acting like a tiny evil genius, people just shrugged and said, yep, demon baby. There are some weird stories too. There's a 10th century rumor that Pope Sylvester II got his position with help from a succubus named Meridiana. She did the usual demon girlfriend thing, exchanging power and secrets for spicy time. He repented right before he died, which apparently makes it fine. Over time, the succubus changed. She stopped showing up as a clawed, ghoulish nightmare and started appearing as a pinup girl. Pretty, flawless, and harmless looking. I blame Japan. That's how she still appears in pop culture now. But in the original stories, she appeared with animal claws, forced men to go down on her, and left them empty and hallucinating. Incubus. The incubus is basically the male version of a succubus. He shows up while you're asleep to do the same kind of spicy things. He mostly targets women, and the experience is said to be so intense that it can leave the victim drained, mentally unstable, or even dead. In early legends, these visits were so intense that they were reproductive. The incubus didn't stop at haunting dreams. He wanted kids. The most famous spawn is Merlin, who, in Christian legend, wasn't born from a man and woman, but from an incubus and some unlucky mortal, which is one way to explain a socially awkward kid with magic powers. Older records go further back to Sumerian myths that lists a demon named Lilu, who disturbed women in their sleep. He had a female version, Lilith, who showed up in men's dreams. The Malleus Maleficarum, the handbook for witch hunters, also had full sections on how to drive off incubi, including confession, relocation, and Hail Marys. But it didn't always work. Some priests said these demons didn't care about holy objects, priests, or logic. Of course, modern medicine has a different take. It explains these experiences as sleep paralysis mixed with hypnagogia, that hazy state between waking and sleeping where your brain can throw hallucinations at you. Combine that with shame, repressed desire, or a few too many sermons, and suddenly your own brain is tricking you into believing you were attacked by something supernatural. Some cultures blame demons like incubi to avoid more uncomfortable explanations. Things like desire repression, trauma, or even assault, and sometimes it helped cover up actual crimes. In other cases, people truly believed they were being attacked, when it was really just repressed desire showing up through dreams or sleep paralysis. Calling it a demon just made it easier to process. Regional versions exist almost everywhere. The Alp in German folklore, the Boto in the Amazon, which is a dolphin that turns into a man, seduces women, then vanishes into the river. The Leiderk in Hungary, which is sometimes, oddly, a glowing chicken. The Perelesnik in Ukraine, which gives you fake treasure and takes your life force. They all follow the same script. Visit at night, seduce, weaken, disappear. Or so the stories go. Pazuzu. Pazuzu is a bug-eyed, winged, dog-faced demon with a snake for genitals and a scorpion tail. In case you're still not sure what in the Frankenstein this is, he also comes with 4 wings and bird claws. Pazuzu comes from ancient Mesopotamia, the region of Babylon and Assyria. He was a wind demon, and specifically, he brought plague. Sounds like a brazy guy. Here's what's weird. Despite all that, people still loved him. They wore his face on necklaces, hung him above their beds, and buried him with their dead. But it was not because he was nice. It was because he scared off worse demons, mainly one named Lamashtu, who liked to attack babies and pregnant women. So to stop her, they'd invite him. If you're wondering why anyone would let a demon with a snake member babysit their newborn, that should help you understand just how bad Lamashtu was. We'll get to her in Tier 5. Women in labor wore Pazuzu amulets to keep her away and invoked his name in rituals to stop miscarriages. These charms were in such high demand that they were mass-produced in gold, bronze, glass, whatever worked. His head was everywhere. However, this demon was a bit bipolar. At home, he was a protector, but elsewhere, he was an evil, raging monster, smashing through evil spirits and possibly also people. He's been called agony of mankind and disease of mankind, but also the one who chases demons into the underworld. He's a 2 for the price of 1 demon package. Some scholars think he shares roots with Bes, the Egyptian household god, because both were ugly, both protected mothers, and both showed up in the same pose on protective amulets. And yes, in case you're asking, Pazuzu is the demon from The Exorcist. Hollywood didn't invent him. Ahriman, Angra Mainyu. Ahriman, who sometimes goes by Angra Mainyu, is one of those figures who shows up as a demon in some sources, a god or spirit in others, and sometimes both at once. He's the literal spirit of destruction, the one who invented storms, plagues, and monsters. He made all the worst stuff, on purpose. Which makes sense for a guy whose name sounds like Angry Man. Why would anyone create such a demon? Well, it started with Ahura Mazda, the god of light, truth, and creation. Ahriman is his opposite in Zoroastrianism, and his entire purpose is to ruin whatever Mazda makes because he represents chaos, lies, and decay. If Mazda builds, Ahriman tears it down. And if Mazda creates paradise, Ahriman adds a leak in the ceiling and rats in the basement. According to the Avesta, these two forces are locked in a long, miserable war. Ahura Mazda creates the world, and Ahriman immediately responds with counter-creations, including 16 plagues, disasters, and monstrosities. This particular beef is a full-time job. He leads the Devas, a group of deceptive false gods who later become full demons. When that fails, he sends wave after wave of demons, and even cooks up a custom serpent monster called Abezethibou. He probably didn't get his desired result with this one, because he then tries to dry up the oceans when all else doesn't work. This guy fails. A lot. But he's persistent. He never stops trying. Zoroastrian texts never really say he was created by anyone. Ahriman just is. Later, a branch of the religion called Zervanism tried to explain where evil came from by saying that Ahura Mazda and Ahriman were twins born of a god called Zervan, who represented time. The story goes that Ahriman, being the kind of spirit who doesn't wait his turn, ripped open the womb to be born first. For that, he got temporary rule over the world for 9,000 years. Then, Mazda takes over. Eventually, later texts and scholars tried to walk it back and say Ahriman isn't real and never existed. But the older stories say he's real. He's dangerous. He made monsters. And he's still out there, somewhere, ruining things. Aeshma. In Zoroastrianism, there's a demon who exists just to ruin your spiritual focus. His name is Aeshma, the demon of wrath. And just so he can look the part, his weapon of choice is a mace soaked in blood. If someone suddenly gets mad, flips a table mid-ritual, and forgets why they were praying to begin with, yep, that's Aeshma. According to the text, he ruins the intention and meaning of religious acts by sending side distractions like war, cattle slaughter, and getting too drunk to stand. Basically, if you're trying to connect to the divine and suddenly there's yelling and gore, that's him. His main enemy is Sraosha, the spirit of obedience, which makes sense, I guess. Aeshma and his nemesis Sraosha both carry maces, but Sraosha is freakishly strong. Oh, and Aeshma answers directly to Ahriman. He serves as his messenger and resident chaos delivery service. In some texts, he's even promoted to commander of all the demons, but that doesn't last, and he's eventually defeated. Depending on the version, either Sraosha or the Sotian, a messiah-like figure, takes him out, or he just runs away like a coward. Before you go into panic mode, the good news is you can get rid of him by saying a prayer. Just one prayer and he doesn't stand a chance. But if you skip it or mess up your ceremony, they say that your worship might as well be for Aeshma himself. Manah. Manah is the demon of evil thought. In Zoroastrianism, he's the disturbing whisper in your head telling you to do all kinds of bad things. His name literally means evil mind in the ancient Iranian language Avestan. Later, he's called Achaman or Akhvan. His job is simple. Corrupt the mind, twist judgment, and sabotage moral thinking. He was one of the first things Ahriman made, which makes him super important in the Zoroastrian demon chain of command. He shows up early in the Gathas, the oldest Zoroastrian texts. At first, he only exists as a bad state of mind. He's not a demon yet, but by the time the younger Avesta was written, he had a face, a name, and a target, the Vohu Manah, or good mind, who stands for wisdom and moral clarity. According to the text, Manah tries to seize the Harana, or divine glory, for himself. And he fails, of course, but not for a lack of trying. He also personally tries to keep Zoroaster by sending him 99 questions, all meant to make him doubt his faith. But Zoroaster outthinks the demon. Later texts say he makes newborns cry by showing them terrifying visions of the end of the world. He was also blamed for planting greed, doubt, deception, corruption, resentment, despair, and every other destructive impulse in the human mind. He fuels paranoia and insecurity. And if you've ever met someone who ruins every conversation by assuming the worst, that's his work. Honestly, the guy does so much, it feels like whoever's in charge of the Zoroastrian underworld forgot how to delegate. In Persian folklore, Akvan even offers lifts to heroes just to drop them in the opposite place they asked for. He's, for all intents and purposes, super petty. Tier 5. Mara. If Buddha had a nemesis, it would be Mara. He's the one who tried to stop the Buddha from achieving enlightenment by sending distractions. First, with his army. Then he sent his 3 daughters, who understood the assignment a little too much. They got undressed and tried everything they could to get him to budge. But Buddha didn't flinch. In Buddhism, Mara transcends being a demon to being a system. He's death and desire. The word Mara literally comes from the Sanskrit form of the verbal root mur, and it means to kill. But instead of your body, he kills your clarity, your motivation, and your ability to stay on the path. Mara shows up in Buddhist scripture as a person and a force that distracts people from focusing on their spiritual life. Well, that's until he got converted. According to a later Buddhist story, Mara once tried to curse a monk named Upagupta. Instead, the monk gave him a necklace made from corpses. I bet you didn't see that one coming. Mara panicked and ran to a god for help, only to be told that he had to seek refuge with the monk he'd just tried to curse. In the end, he swallowed his pride, bowed, and promised to stop fighting the Dharma. The story doesn't spell out exactly why Mara panicked, but most scholars agree that the necklace symbolized impermanence, something Mara manipulates but refuses to face, and that's what rattled him. Rakshasa. So here's the thing about Rakshasas. People like to call them demons, but that's a bit lazy. They're not just evil for kicks. They're old, organized, and extremely competent. They show up all over South and Southeast Asian mythology, like Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and even some strands of Indonesian Islam. Everyone seems to have run into one at some point. Rakshasas are mostly in forests. They can shapeshift, fly, disappear, and create illusions so good you'd swear you were seeing God. But you're likely to get ripped apart or tricked into walking off a cliff if you met one. Their default mood is either hungry or offended, and they respond to both with violence. In the Ramayana, an epic Hindu text, they're ruled by Ravana, the 10-headed king of Lanka who uses illusion magic to kidnap Sita, wife of the hero prince Rama. That act kicks off a divine war that ends with Ravana's death at Rama's hands. Some Rakshasas do defect to the good side. Others are just morally confused. But the ones who aren't confused eat people and ruin sacred rituals for fun. In the Mahabharata, Rakshasas get even nastier. One of the 5 heroic Pandava brothers, Bhima, has whole side stories where he wanders into the forest and ends up wrestling cannibal ogres to death with his bare hands. A pretty clear sign of how common and dangerous these things were in the epic's world. One Rakshasa, named Bakasura, demanded human deliveries like pizza. Another tried to steal weapons and assault a queen. There's a pattern here, and it's violence. Buddhist texts occasionally redeem them. In the Lotus Sutra, some female Rakshasas vow to protect the teachings of the Buddha, which is sweet, but also slightly terrifying when you think about how exactly they intend to do that, considering these are the same beings who drink blood out of skulls in other stories. In general, you should just hope they don't notice you. And if they do, run, if you can. Andhaka. Andhaka was an Asura born by accident. Shiva, the Hindu god of destruction and transformation, was meditating one day when Parvati, his wife, playfully covered his eyes. Because Shiva is, well, Shiva, this blacked out the entire universe. Parvati's hands started sweating because she was touching his all-powerful third eye. The sweat hit the ground, and out came a blind, horrifying child. They named him Andhaka because he was blind. Shiva gave the kid away to a demon king, probably to avoid having to explain things at family dinners. And when the king died, Andhaka took the throne. Then, like every insecure tyrant with too much power, he demanded more. Specifically, he wanted Parvati. You know, the wife of Shiva, his father, who also happened to be his mother. He didn't know that at the time, but still, trying to kidnap your mom because she's hot and unavailable is the kind of thing that would have kept Freud writing for years. This dude actually went to war over it. He sent a messenger to Shiva saying, "Hand over your wife." And Shiva said no. Andhaka didn't like that, so he got his army ready and attacked. The gods fought back, but they didn't know what they were getting into. Every time someone pierced Andhaka, his blood made more of him. There were thousands of clones every time he bled. The only solution was for a group of terrifying, bloodthirsty goddesses to follow him around and slurp up his blood mid-air before clones could spawn. Shiva eventually impaled him on a trident and just left him there for years, hanging like a grotesque kebab. Until finally, Andhaka realized that the woman he wanted was his own mother, and the god he fought was his father. Well, that's messy. He begged for forgiveness, and unlike most stories where the creepy guy gets obliterated, Shiva actually forgave him and made him a leader of his ghostly squad. It's a wild ending, but hey, Hindu gods aren't exactly famous for their strict parenting style. Apep, Apophis. Apophis lived for just one thing: to destroy the world and sabotage Ra, the sun god, at every turn. So every night, when Ra sailed below the horizon and entered the underworld, Apophis, who's usually depicted as a massive serpent, would already be there waiting. He'd be buried in the dark, watching for his chance to strike. To some, Apophis was a god. To others, he was a demon. And to a few, he was both. A full-blown demon god. He ruled over chaos, destruction, silence, and nothingness. And he was always down to cause a little mayhem. Some myths said Apophis had a flint head and a body longer than a barge. Others just say he was eternal, born from the chaotic waters of Nun before the world was even formed. In one version, he came from the saliva of the ancient Egyptian goddess, Neith, when she was still in the primeval waters. The people who believe he's been in existence from the beginning of time use that belief to explain why after every fight he never died. They say it's because he wasn't even alive in the usual way. Each night, Apophis might attack Ra from a mountain, or from the 10th region of the night. Sometimes earthquakes and storms were said to be his doing. Lucky for Ra, he's always had defenders. Like Set, for example, whose only useful skill seemed to be stabbing things. And eventually, Apophis would be cut, burned up, or chopped up. Then it would all happen again the next night when he returns for round 2. Egyptian priests didn't take any chances. They ran yearly rituals to symbolically kill him using wax models. They spat on them, stomped on them, then burned them. Some funerary texts even came with spells to protect the dead from Apophis, just in case he tried to take them on the way out. The point is, he never wins. But if he did just once, it'd be game over for the cosmos. Lamashtu. In ancient Mesopotamia, most demons were basically hitmen for the gods. But not Lamashtu. She was a demon because she felt like it. She acted on her own, with no orders, no assignments, and no mercy. And she was such a terror that people wrote entire rituals just to keep her out of their homes. She had the head of a lion, donkey teeth, long clawed fingers, the feet of a giant bird, and howled like a starving dog. She lived in the underworld, but didn't like to stay there. She came up whenever she wanted, especially to attack newborns. Pregnant women were easy targets, and so were their babies. If one died at birth, or mysteriously in the night, she got blamed. People believed she literally showed up, crawled into the house, and ripped the child away. The books say she touched bellies to pull out fetuses, drank blood, and spread disease. She was also said to poison water, rot plants, and bring nightmares just by passing by. Because she was so hard to stop, people prayed to another demon to hold her back. That was Pazuzu, the violent, ugly, and cruel guy we talked about earlier. But compared to her, he was a security guard. Sometimes both demons would be carved into the same amulet, locked in eternal staring contests over the baby's cradle. The rituals to banish her involved making a little figurine, feeding it, washing it, and sticking it in a black dog's mouth. The dog had to carry it for 3 days, and then the figurine would be buried by a wall to trap her evil and protect the family. Tier 6. Lilith. Lilith may have been the first woman to get a divorce, and she did it before all the demon stuff. Often described as Adam's first wife, she shows up in Jewish folklore, but she's barely in the Bible. The only possible mention is in Isaiah chapter 34 verse 14, where a reference is made to a night monster, but we'll get to that later. One Latin version just calls her a Lamia, which is a whole different nightmare. The idea of Lilith really takes off in the medieval period, where Jewish mystics gave her a full backstory. They said she was made from the same clay as Adam, which makes her his equal, not a spare rib. But when Adam tried to make her obey him, she walked straight out of Eden. The story goes that she then hooked up with Samael, an archangel with a bad reputation, and started having demon children, lots of them. After Lilith left Eden, she turned into something else entirely. She got blamed for infant deaths, infertility, and bad dreams. She's often depicted with wings and bird feet. She was crafted into amulets, bowls, and incantations to keep her out of the house. Some were even worded like legal documents, like ancient restraining orders, telling her she had no rights to the baby or the family. People have tried connecting her to the Mesopotamian spirits like Lamashtu. The comparison makes sense on paper, but the evidence is shaky at best. Also, it's not clear if she started as a demon or a goddess, but whatever she was feared. Some later stories tried to soften her or turn her into a symbol of freedom, but in the older texts, she's not fighting the system. She is the threat. Namtar. In ancient Mesopotamian religion, Namtar was the personal assistant of Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld. His name literally means fate, but it was the kind that comes with disease and decay. He wasn't exactly worshipped, because people were more interested in avoiding him than impressing him. Rather than pray to Namtar, they prayed to survive him. Most of what we know about him comes from myths, curses, and medical incantations begging other gods to make him go away. If you were struck with sudden headaches, chest pains, or unexplained wasting, it was likely that Namtar had passed by. He was technically a minor god, but he also doubled as the demon of disease, and he acted more like a virus than a deity. People described him as venomous, twisted, and dangerous. In one Assyrian vision of the underworld, he's just casually stabbing a man with a sword. Namtar's main job was delivering divine punishment. He was the one Ereshkigal sent when she needed something done without leaving the underworld. In the myth called Ishtar's Descent, it's Namtar who hits the goddess with 60 diseases. Later, he's also the one who walks her half-dead body back out from the underworld. Another time, the god Nergal disrespected him at a heavenly banquet. So Namtar tattled to Ereshkigal, got the guy dragged into the underworld, and nearly triggered a divine war. His job also included keeping other demons in line. Some spells actually asked Namtar to imprison worse spirits in the underworld. That's right, people didn't exactly like him, but they turned to him when they needed help getting rid of other demons. Namtar may have had a wife named Hushbishag and a daughter, but their stories got lost in scattered god lists and half-preserved rituals, so we don't know much about them. Rusalka. In Slavic folklore, the Rusalka is the spirit of a woman who drowned by her own hand or someone else's. Either way, it ends with her body in a river and her soul refusing to move on. People used to think that they were nature spirits who brought water to fields in the spring, made crops grow, and maybe even danced a little under the moonlight. That was the old belief till the stories changed. Somewhere between the 18th and 19th centuries, Rusalki turned into deadly spirits that waited in rivers and lakes for someone to get too close. Usually a man. They're usually drop-dead gorgeous, with long hair, pale skin, and slender limbs. They sing, smile, or cry to lure you in, then drag you under with their hair, or hold you tight until your lungs fill with water and you drown. Sometimes they tickle people to death. Yep, you heard that right. The appearance and habitat of a Rusalka depends on the region. In Ukraine, they mostly live in rivers, and in Belarus, they're found in the forest. Polish and Czech versions describe differences based on age and hair color, but the ending is usually the same. The victim doesn't come back. In the 7 days that make up Rusalka Week, which comes once a year in late spring, they're super active. So active that people weren't allowed to swim during that time. At the end of the week, communities would hold mock funerals for the Rusalki to send them back down, but it never really worked. There are some Rusalki that actually have names, like Dana, who was drowned by her stepmother, Kostroma, who accidentally married her brother, and Marina, who lured her old lover into the river after he married someone else. Today, they get mistaken for mermaids, but it is said that the vengeful spirits haunt because no one stopped what happened to them. Krampus. Krampus isn't technically a demon in the religious sense, but try telling that to the terrified kids in Alpine villages. He's a hairy, horned figure from the Alpine regions who shows up in early December, just before the feast of St. Nicholas. While St. Nick gives sweets to good kids, Krampus carries a bundle of sticks and sometimes a sack. The sticks are for hitting, and the sack is for kidnapping. Allegedly, he drowns or eats children who misbehave, and this creepy lore is presented as a normal part of holiday festivities. He's described as having one human foot and one goat hoof, along with fangs, a long tongue, and a body covered in dark hair. On Krampusnacht, he walks the streets, swatting at children, often with Nicholas, but sometimes alone. He was banned in Austria in the 1930s by a fascist government that considered him too scary for children, and later pamphlets called him evil, but that didn't stop him. He's back now though, showing up in city festivals, postcards, and horror films. There are even Krampus societies and pub crawls in the US. While some just like the costumes, others lean into the punishment themes a little too enthusiastically. Old Krampus cards, called Krampuskarten, show him leering at children or chasing women with his tongue out. In a few, he's vaguely inappropriate. But this was before Hallmark sanitized the holidays. Pontianak. In Southeast Asia, when you hear a baby cry in the dark and there's no baby around, it's highly recommended that you take off running. That's a kuntilanak, or Pontianak if you're in Malaysia. She's what happens when a woman dies alone and angry during childbirth. The kuntilanak is a violent soul and is usually described as a blood-soaked woman in white with red eyes, long black hair, and sharp fingernails. She is also said to have preferred victims. She goes after men first and seduces them if she needs to. She laughs like a woman, or screams like an infant depending on the occasion. If the sound is loud, you're safe. But if it's quiet, she's already too close. Sometimes there's a sweet smell, like plumeria flowers, but it's just to throw you off before the smell of rot kicks in. According to the Malay stories, she rips people open with her nails and eats their organs. Some say she targets pregnant women and infants. Others say she finds her prey by sniffing freshly washed clothes. That's why, to this day, people in some regions don't hang laundry out overnight. In her case, though, there's a fix. Hammer a nail into the back of her neck or the top of her head, and she'll turn into a docile, beautiful woman. She could even become a wife. That is, until the nail comes out. She's also associated with banana trees, which sounds ridiculous until you realize people actually avoid planting them near homes for this reason. Modern films and folklore have tried to soften her image and make her a tragic anti-hero, but the old stories don't really care about redemption. She died badly and turned into a vicious killer, period. The city of Pontianak in Indonesia is named after her, and to clear the area, the founders claimed they fired actual cannons at the ghost. Of course, it's up to you to decide whether or not you believe that.